Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here as we just came from a vote recently on the floor where the Democrats tried to stop the Republicans from leaving, but 220 Republicans voted to adjourn. That means that we have like 4 legislative days left to avoid the across-the-board cuts. This month, the Republicans are engaged in some early March madness. They're playing games with our economy. They're playing games with jobs for the American people. They're playing games with our investments in the future. It's just not right. The job stability and security of the middle class that the president emphasized so eloquently in his State of the Union address, that stability of the middle class hangs in the balance. The last thing Republicans should do is to kick off another recess. 9 days will be steady that we will be out to avert a manufactured crisis. They manufacture the crisis, and then instead of having us try to avert that crisis, they go on a 9-day recess. Why? Why? People inside and outside the Congress are saying a simple message: no deal, no break. We really should be here. Democrats are about solutions, the Republicans about sequester. We want a balanced approach of responsible cuts, revenue and growth, a plan for fairness to create jobs and reduce the deficit. The Republican strategy of obstruction and delay and recess injects uncertainty into our economy, our markets, our consumer confidence. It's just not right. The Democrats want to get a job done, and we're here to tell you once again about that. I'm pleased to yield to our distinguished Democratic whip, who had some words to say on this on the floor of the House earlier, which I hope he will also share with you. Mr. Hoyer.
Perhaps not quite as animatedly, but
go for it.
2 weeks from today, if Congress fails to act, the Republican policy of sequestration will take effect. Sequestration is a dangerous and irrational policy, or as Leader Pelosi said, cutting across the board without reference to priority level. That it will have devastating effects on our national security and economic recovery. Thousands of Americans will lose their jobs or be furloughed, including teachers, researchers, law enforcement agents, military contractors. Everyone should be clear that sequestration is a Republican policy, and it is a bad policy. On July 19, 2011, 229 Republicans, that's 98% of their caucus, voted for the cut, cap, and balance bill that employed the irrational approach of sequestration as an alternative to cutting spending in a rational and balanced way. So when the American people hears this is something that President Obama wanted to do, they ought to know that's not true. Period. This is a Republican policy included in their bill that they offered July 11, 2011, before there was any discussion between Mr. Obama and Mr. Boehner to avoid the debt limit being violated and having America's credit undermined. That's when it was brought up, because it was Republican policy, and maybe that was part of a compromise, which it ended up being. 222 Republicans voted today, again, as the leaders pointed out, 96% of the caucus, to go home. To go home for a week without a way to turn off the sequester. They're once again walking away from the American people. You may remember when unemployment insurance was at risk, I said they were walking away from 6 million people. They walked away from middle-class tax cuts. I assume that when they say this in advertising their adjournment resolution, they called it Rules Resolution Prohibiting Democratic Grandstanding on the House Floor. Not only would they not put Mr. Van Hollen's legislation on the floor 2 weeks ago, not only would they not put it on the floor this week, they won't even open the floor to discussion to the representatives of the American people. I assume that grandstanding they refer to is when we demanded that they address unemployment insurance and prevent a middle-class tax increase. Republicans would have us return to our districts with nothing to show our constituents, notwithstanding the fact we've been here for 6 weeks this year, who are deeply concerned about how the sequester will make their lives more difficult and their communities less safe. Our country less safe and our communities less safe as a result of sequester. That would be extremely irresponsible, and we're urging them to stay and keep the House in session. We are calling on them to stay and work with us in pursuit of a balanced solution, to which Mr. Van Hollen will address. Yesterday, Senate Democrats offered an alternative plan that is balanced and will turn off the sequester. If Nancy Pelosi were the Speaker of this House and I were the Majority Leader of this House, sequester would not happen. Representative Chris Van Hollen of the Budget Committee offered an alternative as well. As I said, Speaker Boehner and Leader Cantor ought to allow it to come to the floor. They have not yet. Unfortunately, the majority is under the influence of a faction of radical rejectors of common sense. The American people ought to send us a message, and to House Republicans, no deal, no break. I now want to yield to my friend, Mr. Van Hollen.
Thank you, Steny. Not only did the Republicans in the House propose the idea of sequester as a policy before it was ever in the Budget Control Act, but when the Budget Control Act was passed, I think you all remember Speaker Boehner saying he got 98% of what he wanted. And now they're getting the sequester that they called for. In fact, the Tea Party Republicans went on national television the other day, Senator Rand Paul, cheering on the idea of the sequester right after the President of the United States had said, let's avoid the sequester through a balanced approach. So the President wants to avoid it. Tea Party caucus in the House and elsewhere cheering on the idea of sequester. What are the consequences? According to the nonpartisan independent Congressional Budget Office, if we don't avoid the sequester between March 1st and the end of this year, 750,000 Americans will not have jobs that otherwise would have. It'll cost us 750,000 jobs, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Just to put that in perspective, that's the number of jobs that have been created from October of last year through January of this year. The Congressional Budget Office says that we will have 1/3 less economic growth. 1/3 less economic growth this year if that sequester goes into effect. So you would think our Republican colleagues would join us in staying here right now to prevent that from happening. Now, in the House, with Leader Pelosi and my colleagues here, we have 4 times presented a plan to avoid the sequester for the year and yet achieve the same amount of long-term deficit reduction without losing 750,000 jobs through a combination of targeted cuts as well as the elimination of a lot of tax breaks for special interests and for very wealthy people. And our Republican colleagues have repeatedly denied us the opportunity to even vote on that, and as was said, now want to leave town without a chance to vote on it. Now, yesterday, the Senate Democrats put forward a plan very similar to the one that we've put forward. It includes the Buffett rule, which makes sure that folks who work for people like Mr. Buffett don't have to pay a higher effective tax rate than people who make $2 million a year by eliminating a lot of these special breaks, by making sure there's a limit to how you take advantage of those. We included the elimination of direct payments, excessive farm subsidies. The Senate did that as well. We also had a provision that would end taxpayer subsidies to the big 5 oil companies. The Senate has instead adopted a provision that, starting in 2015, would in a measured way reduce defense spending. And we can embrace that framework as well as an alternative going forward. So the bottom line, as we gather here today, is that House Democrats, Senate Democrats, and the President of the United States are all 100% united in coming together with an alternative that would prevent 750,000 Americans from losing their jobs starting January 1st, and an alternative that achieves the same amount of deficit reduction, but in a smart and measured way over a period of time. So while we're all here ready to do the work, where we're united behind a plan to prevent that kind of massive job loss, our Republicans are heading back home and not doing the people's business. So with that, I'm very pleased to hand it over to the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, who really has focused on the terrible impact these cuts will have across the board. Nita Lowey.
It's no secret to anyone that the impending sequestration poses a huge threat to our economy and our national security. And it's no secret that time is running out for us to do something, and we know what to do, to make sure that we prevent these catastrophic cuts. The House Republican leadership must keep the House in session so that we can get something done. We shouldn't be leaving town with the impending sequestration. Sequestration would impose an additional $1.2 trillion in cuts across the board to initiatives that Democrats and Republicans care about. In every part of our country, in every district, there's going to be pain from these cuts. In fact, a George Mason University study indicates that 2.1 million jobs could be lost if we don't act to stop the sequester. This week, the Appropriations Committee put out a report, and it makes it very clear that these cuts would make it harder for middle-class families to get ahead. Furloughs of air traffic controllers, food inspectors, Border Patrol, cuts to job training, federal education assistance, reduce investments in safe drinking water, medical research, diminish military readiness, embassy security. The sequester will make it harder to train for the job you need or to keep the one you have. It will make it harder to keep enough teachers in our classrooms, researchers who can find cures in our labs, and it will make it harder to invest in repairing our broken infrastructure, which creates good-paying jobs. The clock is ticking. It is ticking towards March 1st. Republicans are just wasting time playing a blame game and taking a recess from session. We need to pass a balanced solution like we have discussed today. We have to do it now. We can't leave town and just delay. Mr. Becerra, our great chair.
Thank you, Nita. If you've been watching, you're beginning to see something that's no longer out of the ordinary. Yesterday, for the first time in our nation's history, the Republicans decided to filibuster a president's nominee to head the Department of Defense as Secretary of Defense. A patriot, a wounded Vietnam veteran, a Republican, was denied a chance by Republicans to have a full vote to become the Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel. The same week, the Senate passed by a bipartisan majority of 78 to 22 the Violence Against Women's Act. And yet here in the House, Republicans once again, as they did last year, refused to let the American people have a vote on protecting women from domestic violence. And today, Republicans in the House decided to cut the pay of the very same people that you heard Ms. Lowey name to you: law enforcement personnel, health and safety inspectors, embassy personnel. Today, the Republicans voted to cut their pay, to pay for tax cuts to the very wealthy, to keep subsidies for big oil companies going, things that Republicans refuse to eliminate, those types of subsidies and tax loopholes. And so I say to you all, welcome to the new normal for the Tea Party Republicans who control the Congress. This is no longer an exception. It is the rule for Republicans. 73% of House Republicans voted in 2011 for the Republican-inspired sequester. And as Mr. Van Hollen pointed out, Speaker Boehner himself said he got about 98% of what he wanted. And he says, I'm pretty happy. Now, 222 House Republicans vote for a 9-day recess when we are just 13 calendar days and only 4 legislative days away from seeing the devastating cuts under the so-called sequester take effect. Remember, Republicans were for this sequester before they were against it, before they decided to do nothing about it. Democrats have a very simple message. This is no time to cut and run. Let's stay and get our work done. And with that, let me yield now to the Vice Chair of the caucus, Joe Crowley.
Thank you, Javier. Let me just say that when American businessmen and women and hardworking American families go through tough times, they don't decide that that's the proper time to take time off from doing work. In fact, that's when they work even harder. And that's the message my Republican colleagues, the Republican Congress needs to hear. This is not the time to do less. It's the time to do more. As Leader Pelosi mentioned before, with just 4 legislative days left before this Republican congressional-made crisis, the American people expect us to act and not sit on our hands and do nothing. The American people are tired of the crisis-making here in Washington. They're tired of the creation of additional cliffs. They want to see us accomplish something. They want to see us get things done. This is not the time for the Republican Congress to leave town, to sit on their hands, to go back to their districts, to build observation decks so they can observe the fruits of their destructive behavior, because that's what they're going to be doing. And with that, I turn the microphone to Steve Israel.
Thank you, Joe. Very briefly, by sending us into recess, the Republicans may be sending us back towards a recession. 750,000 jobs will be lost as a result of their actions. You know, there are real-world consequences to their dysfunction and their chronic chaos. Sometimes an act of a natural disaster devastates an economy. Sometimes an act of war devastates an economy. In this case, the acts of the Republican majority will devastate our economy. 750,000 job losses will devastate our economy. The economic security of the middle class is going to be threatened. Extreme events out of our control do devastate an economy. In this case, the extremism of an out-of-control Republican majority will devastate our economy, and that is unacceptable. My final point is this. I want to just remind people that when Democrats were in the majority, we didn't have sequestration. With Republicans in the majority, there will be sequestration. When we are back in the majority, we won't have sequestration. So for the defense workers who may get pink slips, and the federal law enforcement officers who may be furloughed, and the FBI agents and the food inspectors who are looking at layoffs, I want to remind them that those pink slips have been brought to you by this Republican of chronic chaos. We have a plan. They've got partisanship. We have a compromise. They've got a recess. It is time for them to get to work to avoid this crisis and stand up for the middle class. Thank you.
I thank my colleagues for their statements here today, but all of their hard work going into reaching that compromise. And Mr. Van Hollen, we thank you especially on the Budget Committee for the work that you have done there, and Congresswoman, Madam Chair, Ranking Member, for pointing out so clearly what the consequences are of this. As I was listening to my colleagues, and the word sequester and sequestration kept coming up, I was thinking, most people in America don't know what that word means, right? What it means is unemployment. Sequester equals job loss. There's absolutely no question about that. So why would you want to engage in job loss when instead we could come together for a solution that is reasonable, that is balanced, that is bipartisan, that will promote growth with jobs? With responsible cuts, with additional revenue, we can get through this. Why not? Why not? We should not be going home. We should, in the House, be working. Because, as has been said, the beauty of what is going on with Mr. Van Hollen's committee on the Democratic side and under the leadership of Chairwoman Patty Murray in the Senate, the proposals are divided evenly between cuts and revenue. And among the cuts, they're divided, the spending cuts are divided between domestic and defense. We have a little more revenue in our bill to even things off from the House side. But what's important to note is that we in the House should be here because when you have revenue bills, when you have spending bills like that, you must begin in the House. Anybody who knows the Constitution knows that that power of the person and revenue begins in the House of Representatives. So when the Speaker says, well, I'm waiting to see if the Senate acts, that means I'm not doing anything because we must begin. We must begin. So again, let's not give new meaning to the term March Madness, which right now is associated with great fun, competition, and I saw the Hoyas win the other night. I know the Terps are doing great, Stenny. We're getting ready for March Madness. Thank you.
Good luck.
But that's what we like to think of March Madness, not madness that springs from us going into recess that could lead us into recession, as Mr. Israel has said. With that, we'd be pleased to take, I know my colleagues would be pleased to take any questions you may have. Yes, sir.
Why you seem to be giving the Democrats in the Senate a pass on this. Why so? They're gone.
Why are we saying giving them a pass?
You're giving them a pass. They went home as well.
Yeah, but the bill has to begin in the House. Bill has to begin in the House. Can we speak to this?
Well,
the bill has to begin in the House.
Here are a couple other numbers. 0, the number of time House Republicans have done anything to avoid the sequester in this Congress. They've done nothing in the 113th Congress. Senate Democrats have now put a plan on the table, which we think is a good plan. It would avoid the sequester. So we're here in Washington, all united, and they're going home. I'm sure that we can get a Harry Reid. He'll come back if Speaker Boehner will join with us in supporting the plan that House and Senate Democrats and the President of the United States support to avoid the sequester and avoid 750,000 Americans losing their job. We'll do it. They've put a plan on the table, this Congress. We've put a plan on the table, this Congress. House Republicans have put 0 plans on the table, this Congress, to avoid the sequester.
In fact, Tom, as you well know, anytime this is mentioned, they talk about what they did in the last Congress. Those bills are gone. But they keep pointing to them as if somehow magically they're going to be resurrected. Well, if they want to resurrect them, put them in, put them on the floor, and let's vote.
Can you address, you often talk about education and health and other areas here. We've heard so much about the sequester, if it hits, about it hitting defense spending. Can you lay out, maybe some of the others could as well, your 2 or 3 areas that are most important to Democrats that the sequester, if it hits, would impact in the spending area?
Well, I'm going to defer to our budget chair because he has worked with all of our caucus on this, but I know that other members will be talking about it too, and Miss Lowy, of course, translates. That's where the rubber meets the road in the Appropriations Committee. But let me just say, since you mentioned education, when they talk about cutting education, it's a very bad, a mindless thing to do. Speaking of minds and education, nothing brings more money to the Treasury than educating the American people. Early childhood, K through 12, higher education, postgraduate, lifetime learning. Nothing brings more money to the Treasury. So in addition to the fact that all innovation begins in the classroom, our international competitiveness depends on us being number one, and that education is key to that, it also brings more money to the Treasury to reduce the deficit, for one. Investments in biomedical research, the whole world is in competition on this, and we're going to cut our investments to biomedical research, to grants that are put out outside the National Institutes of Health, and as well as what is happening there. That is really giving the advantage to other countries over ours. But I'm going to yield to Congresswoman Lowy because she listed some of these, and you mentioned those too, so I wanted to speak to those. But Ms. Lowy.
Thank you, Madam Leader. I wanted to just follow up with your comments about research. A major New York hospital came to me and said, how could you have sequester? We get $185 million for research into cancer, Alzheimer's, autism, and on and on. Not only is this critical research that saves lives, but this is economic development. And these kinds of institutions exist all over the country. So you're going to take steps backwards in the important research that we have to do. And by the way, this saves not only lives but money when you can find cures for these illnesses. But it is jobs of people, hardworking people. I was at the Energy and Water Committee the other day, where there is some bipartisanship, and it was clear to me that it didn't matter, because there were going to be cuts in our incredible research labs around the country. And this is closely allied with the defense industry as well. We are doing important research that supports the defense establishment, and again, it is making amazing advances with nuclear issues, much more than I could even discuss with you today. Look at what the labs are doing around the country. And education. We know, as the leader mentioned, that it's so critical to get our young people in pre-K to make sure that they are getting the education they need so they don't fall behind. Because if you fall behind at the beginning, then what happens later on? This sequester doesn't make any sense at all. We should be sitting down as appropriators and working it out. And I must tell you that there are many people on the Republican side of the aisle on the Appropriations Committee with whom I've worked for years, believe in regular order. They'd like to sit down and work it out, but this Tea Party crowd wants to go home, and all they're saying is sequester, sequester, sequester. So, Chad, I can tell you there are a dozen more examples. I think you mentioned air traffic control. This is critical. Food and safety. What about the food that comes into our country? This is really serious. It creates chaos in dozens of industries around the country. And the bottom line, it's a deterrent to our economic future. I wanted to mention one other example and elaborate on that, and that's infrastructure. We all believe we have to deal with the deficit. We all believe, and we have it in writing, that we need a long-term plan to deal with the deficit. But right now, as President Obama says, we have to put people to work. Our roads, our bridges are crumbling. So we're going to cut infrastructure at this critical time? This is madness. We should be working, stay here, and we could work it out together. The people that are paying their dues or their obeisance to the Tea Party should be isolated, and the rational people on both sides of the aisle should work together and get this done.
And I just want to add something just briefly to that, Chad, because one of the most important crises that are created by this is the inability of people who are performing services for the American people to plan properly, or for the people who are receiving those services or working with government to have any sense of confidence that tomorrow will be a stable tomorrow and they can do the work that they're expected to do. It is almost incalculable, the undermining of confidence and good order of getting a job done and the cost that that will require additionally to the American people. Totally irresponsible.
If I could just emphasize one point on the deficit reduction. The proposal we've put forward in the House Democrats, and the proposal Senate Democrats have put forward, achieve the same amount of deficit reduction as the sequester would do, but they achieve it without losing 750,000 jobs. Why? Because you have targeted cuts over a period of time. We get rid of these direct payments to agribusinesses, which serve no useful purpose right now. We ask very high income earners, people paying more than $2 million a year, to pay a 30% effective tax rate, so they can't take advantage disproportionately of all these tax preferences that are in the code. And so what Republicans are saying is they'd rather cut all that right now at the expense of 250,000 American jobs than get rid of these excessive subsidies for agribusinesses or ask people making $2 million a year to pay a little bit more. So we get the same amount of deficit reduction over a period of time in a smart, measured way without the 250,000 Americans losing their jobs. And the other thing that's important to understand is there are going to be federal employees who perform important services for the American people at NIH, National Institutes of Health, others. They will be furloughed. But the 750,000 jobs I'm talking about, that's not federal employees. Those are non-federal employees. Those are Americans throughout the rest of the economy. So yes, you're going to see huge disruption in government services and all the negative implications in our investments in our future. But you're also, on top of that, going to see 750,000 Americans lose their jobs, according to the CBO.
And actually, also for Ranking Member Lloyd, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Hal Rogers, said that he's planning to introduce a CR that would be at the 1043 level, be subject to sequestration. He plans on doing that in the next couple of weeks in an effort to ideally avoid a government shutdown. Would Democrats support a CR that would go until September at the 1043 level, subject to sequestration?
You probably know the details. That CR would make appropriate changes in the defense part, the defense bill, and the Milcon bill, and leave the others alone. Now, the negative is they're not making any adjustments in the National Institutes of Health, Homeland Security bill, air traffic control, food and safety inspectors, etc. However, it could go over to the Senate. The Senate could make important changes and then come back here, and let's see if we can get some bipartisan working together. But it's not clear exactly what would happen. And then, as I understand it, and you've all reported it, first we looked at it and we said, this is an interesting idea. Let's explore it. Let's see if we can work something out. But after this happens, they are still planning to do the sequester. So it would be the CR attached to the defense bill and the Milcom bill that would go to the Senate. It could be made better with Barbara Mikulski and Senator Shelby. But then they still want to do the sequester. Now, I just want to close with one other important thing. The Budget Control Act already cut $1.5 trillion. It's important to know that the discretionary part of our budget is the lowest percentage of the economy of GDP that it's been in 45 years. So when we talk about cutting jobs, when we talk about destroying the economy, this is real. These aren't statistics. These are people in every district in our country that are going to be hit by this. And that's why this plan is really not a total solution at all. And I think what our chairman said before is critical.
Wait, let me emphasize one thing about that. I talked about the 750,000 jobs lost. That doesn't change that at all. You're still taking those big, deep, immediate cuts within a very short period of time. So, again, the independent, nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says when you suck that much investment out of the economy in a very short period of time, Americans are going to lose jobs. So the sequestration element, the magnitude of the cuts will remain the same under that plan, and so your total job loss number will remain the same under that plan. From the point of view of the whole economy, you're just rearranging the chairs on the decks of the Titanic. The Titanic still goes down, losing 250,000 jobs and reducing economic growth by a full third this year.
Can I make a comment? I don't want to prolong this, but I'm not sure that what you posited is correct. In trying to get Republican votes for not going over the cliff, as I understand it, the Speaker made two promises. One was that Ryan would present a budget that would balance within 10 years. As you know, his initial budget was 2040 or thereabouts to balance. That is going to be, if he does that, he's going to savage the economy, as well as government, national security, and economic security. And the second promise, as I understand he made to the RSC, was that they would mark appropriation bills to the $985 billion figure, which was the RSC budget's figure that you recall we had a vote on. We voted present. They were worried that the RSC budget would prevail, and they switched votes so that they could defeat the RSC's budget, if you recall, because they thought 985 was too radical. It is, but it's my understanding that Speaker Boehner made a representation to the RSC at the time of the Cliff vote that we would mark to the 985 figure, not the 1043.
This is the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. He introduced this. The reason he wanted us to introduce
No,
it.
but for clarification, he's talking about the CR that's attached to the defense bill and the Milcom bill. After that, they are still going to do the sequester, which brings it down to the level that Mr. Hoyer mentioned. So it's not alone.
Right.
So if you mark
still
at the
get same
1043.
you understand.
No, I do understand.
Okay,
I
got it.
understand, but the CR would be at 1043. It would be, but it's subject to sequestration.
But-
Which is
Not
how-
just
which is
planning to
what is
allow
happening right
sequestration
now.
to happen.
Yeah.
We had that presentation. Sequestration is going to take place according to them. They've made that decision.
And there is a rumor that one of the other promises the Speaker made to his members is that if they voted for previous legislation, or if they allowed it to come to the floor, because they never did get 218, that sequestration would go through. Now, sequestration is a bad idea for a lot of reasons. Avoiding it is a very good idea, because then we can move to where we need to go, whether it's doing our appropriations bills or doing a CR or an omnibus, whatever form that takes, hopefully not a CR. But that also we can go into the mode of many of these Ways and Means Committee folks up here want to talk about simplification and fairness in our tax code, and we have to go to that place and do that. People have said, okay, what is this about? We all want to reduce the deficit. In order to reduce the deficit, we know that we have to cut spending and we have to increase revenue in order for us to have growth with jobs. Democrats have supported $1.6 trillion in cuts, $1.2 in the Budget Control Act, another $400 billion in other actions taken in the last Congress. Last year, $1.6 trillion. The whole idea was to have it balanced. On the revenue side, we have $600 billion. So what's that? 2.5 to 1, 3 to 1 in favor of cuts. So I hope that you would, in your messaging to the American people, make it clear that we have made cuts. We have passed bills for those cuts. But we want to see more in terms of on the revenue side to make this happen. One way to go is the Buffett rule, which says that everyone should be paying the people making over $2 million a year would pay 30% by closing some loopholes, making them not be available beyond 30%. On the other hand, the Republicans are saying, we don't want to touch tax breaks, tax giveaways to big oil. We would rather you cut Pell Grants by the same amount. I don't think that is a reflection of the values of the American people. But the record should be clear as to where we stand today. We have voted for $1.6 trillion in cuts. On the other side of it, $600 billion in revenue. No more tax cuts for the wealthy, say the Republicans. Take it out of Meals on Wheels, food safety, education, Head Start, the safety of our neighborhoods, the education of our children, the safety of our food, the defense of our country, our national security. It's just not right. I think that was it. So
to rephrase a little bit of what Frank's question was, I think we can all accept as a fact that the House Republicans can't keep the government open. They just won't have 218 votes, no matter how they do things. Would Democrats, if the devil's bargain would be to
either allow the government to shut at the end of March or pass or approve a CR that leaves in place the sequester.
Well, listen, look what it says. I appreciate your question and the good faith in which it has been offered. The Republicans are poised to shut down government. The Republicans are poised to and let sequestration go forward, which is sequestration. Do you know what that word means? Well, what it means to the American people is unemployment, no jobs, take us to recession. It's not quite an exact Latin translation, but that's what it means. That's what it means. So we have no idea even what the provenance of Mr. Rogers' proposal is. Does it have the backing of the leadership? Let's see what is proposed, if and when. But the fact is, do not move. This is their obstruction. And we have made many cuts, and we stand ready to make more. But we're not going to destroy our opportunity for growth in our country, growth with jobs. Because at the end of the day, revenue comes from those jobs. So if you're interested in deficit reduction, you need more revenue. And let me just say this one other thing. So curious that in the 8 years of the Bush administration, while the bulk of this deficit was being amassed, you didn't hear them say boo, hoo, woo, any deficit hawk bird sound you can come up with. It was a endangered species, the deficit hawk. But I also think it's important to remember this, and this is the last thing I want to say here today, and I'll yield to my God. Understand this. The Republican Party in the Congress, as opposed to the Republican Party in the country, and that's why I say to Republicans, take back your party. Republican Party in the Congress is dominated by anti-government ideologues, and they will forever want to reduce taxes on special interest, make cuts in the education of our children and the care of our seniors and the rest, because they do not believe in government. So shrink the tax revenue and make serious the cuts that undermine our economic growth, that undermine the education of our children, undermine the creation of jobs. But that's who they are, and bless their hearts. They act upon their beliefs, and that's what they believe, and that's what this fight is about. So let's not skirt around the edges here. Let's understand what is fundamental between the two parties here. Yes, we're going to reduce the deficit. Yes, we need to make cuts to do it. We have and we continue to. We need more revenue. We need growth. Anything, my colleagues?
Thank you.
Thank you.